Hello, this is Edith Newmeyer, and I'm the author of the book The Mystery of Adam. Today I'm going to start on my sixth chapter, which is on marriage. I talked about my seventh chapter first, which was on the church, and so I'm going back to the sixth chapter and I'll talk about marriage for quite some time. Marriage is a very important, of course, chapter when we talk about men and women and how God created them. And it seems like when people talk about marriage, they always have to talk about the role, kind of the same as the church. What kind of role does the woman have in the church, or women have in the church? And the same thing goes for marriage. What kind of role does the woman and the man have in the church, in marriage? So we'll be talking about quite a lot. But before we start, I think I should probably talk a little bit about what marriage is not, because as I have talked so much about when it comes to man and a woman, marriage, church, we have been lied to so much. As you know, if you have followed me with my videos, you know that I believe that the first human being was not a man. And yet, 6,000 years we have been lied to. Now, I'm assuming because the past 2,000 years we have definitely been lied to. Even Paul was deceived to believe, or at least it comes across that way, that he was deceived to believe that the man was created first. I don't have 100% proof. It just seems through his writing that that's what he believed. Now, why did he believe that the first human being was a man? Was it because of tradition? Was it because of Talmud? It's kind of hard for me to say that. But when we study Genesis, it is very obvious. I mean, if you just have an open eye, you don't even have to be a scholar, you can see that the first human being was not a man. And that the first human being, I mean, the Bible says it. God created them male and female. He created them. And the first human being, he created male and female. So male and female ingredients were inside that first human being. Now, why did people end up believing that the first human being was a man? I don't know. I have an idea. It's because of male dominance. And that male dominance has affected everything, including, of course, marriage and how we look at marriage. So let's look a little bit about what marriage is not before we even talk about what marriage is or how God created marriage. Now, today we have people, many people, okay, that have a kind of fairy tale mentality about marriage. Now, let's say 100 years ago, that was not the case. That has developed within the past 100 years, maybe even within the past 50 years, since we had television and films that influenced the thinking of humankind. Now, before that, marriage was usually a marriage of arrangement. At least 100 years ago, that's the way it was. So before 100 years ago, that's how marriage was arranged. It was a marriage of arrangement in most cases. Okay, it was a marriage of convenience. In other words, people were put together by their families, by their parents. They decided who the children married, and was usual within the social class. So if you middle class, you stayed within the middle class. If you lower class, you stayed within the lower class, and the upper class, they were kind of separate. So it was, again, marriage was something for convenience. Now, still today, this can still happen in some circles where the family decides, like especially in the Muslim world, where the families decide who the sons and daughters will get married to. And it's usually done because of financial reasons. The girls uh, will be married to a man that is similar, has a similar financial status as the father. And the son is being married into a family that has a wife that has a similar status. So we're still, this is still happening today. Now, today, lots of people, though, also get married because they think, they fall in love, and they find like Prince Charming. Okay, and so they live happily ever after because they find this Prince Charming. It seems like people think they have to fall in love. And we will talk about this kind of a little more later on, is this falling in love, because this falling in love is created because of hormones. And these hormones are really not good. And so I'm not going to go into detail today, but that's why people get married, because the relationship is hormone driven. It's not anymore convenient driven. In other words, hey, I'm going to look at the other person and decide this is a person that is best suited for me because financially, because we have the same interests, we have the same beliefs. No, it's usually not done done like that anymore. So that is the wrong way to get married, and that causes a lot of problems. And that is not something that was God's intention. God's intention was not that we just blindly go into a relationship and not look at the other person if we're compatible. So that's one way. Well, the other way is also that we are very influenced by our religious beliefs. Like in my case, uh, I'm very much influenced, or have been in the past, by the church's beliefs. And I'm saying church beliefs because I have found out that these beliefs were not biblical. A lot of these beliefs are not biblical. And so, again, we're getting married for the wrong reasons, or staying married for the wrong reasons. Uh, Traditionally, in the Catholic Church, uh, marriage is considered a sacrament. And that was started by St. Augustine. He decided that marriage is a sacrament. Now, what is a sacrament? A sacrament is like a mystical union. Okay, so he believed that marriage is this mystical union, which falls right into place with fairy tale. Okay, nothing realistic to it. So he made sure that the man and the woman could not divorce at all, except if there was if one of the partners had an affair. So that was the only reason. why a marriage could be resolved. So adultery. And this idea, and I call it idea because it's really not biblical, and we'll talk about that more. This idea that marriage cannot be broken is absolutely not biblical. It's because according to the law of Moses, divorce was allowed. And divorce was allowed for certain reasons. And so, well, since we're right here, let's then, so that's what marriage is definitely not, okay? Marriage is not a sacrament. Marriage is not this mystical union that cannot be broken, and that God frowns upon when you dissolve the marriage. Now, there's so many reasons why a marriage has to be dissolved. Now, God Himself dissolved His marriage with Israel. And that's why I'm saying if God can dissolve a marriage contract, then human beings can. It's just very simple. When God has reasons to dissolve a marriage contract because the other party does not fulfill the contract anymore, and He says, that contract is null and void now, then we can do it as well. So this idea that it is a mystical union sacrament is not biblical at all. So now what is marriage? Well, in the Old Testament, let's go to Genesis, okay? In Genesis, because God divided the first human being, okay, I already said the first human being was male and female in one. And then in the second creation count, God takes away the woman from the man. So He divides the human being into two, a man and a woman. And then afterwards He says, therefore, because He divided them, therefore the man shall leave father and mother, cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And Jesus picked up on that. He said, because that's the case, because God did that, therefore nobody should divide this union that God has put together. Now, that is true, nobody should. However, it still happens. The union can still be broken. You shouldn't break it, but in our fallen world, it is being done. Okay? Now, God's intention was never for humankind to fall and rebel against Him. His intention was for us to live with Him, have fellowship with Him. But when we broke away from Him, our relationship with our partner, whether it's the man or the woman, was broken. We are now, because of the fall, because we're not connected to God anymore, we are limited in our way, in our behavior, in that we are not capable of really fully loving somebody anymore. Okay, we became very selfish, and that selfishness, of course, will affect our relationships, and especially the relationship with our spouse. And so because of that, because now we have a sinful nature, therefore, marriage sometimes does not last because one person will not fulfill the marriage contract. So marriage is a contract between two people. Now, in paradise, when God created this first marriage, it was different because, like I said, the first human beings were not affected by sin, and so they had this perfect relationship. So there was no need for dividing the couple or for divorce. However, after the fall, that changed radically. So after the fall, a contract was very important, that the people, the man and the woman that wanted to get married, they wanted to marry and stay together, they made a contract. And in that contract was written what the man and the woman had to fulfill in this marriage. Okay? Every marriage contract in the Old Testament, during Old Testament times, had that written into it. The two people got together, man and the woman, got together and made up this marriage contract. Now, this marriage contract is very unique to the law of Moses. That marriage contract is usually not the case in secular cultures. In secular cultures, the woman was treated as property. After the fall, the woman became property, became the property of the father and of the man. And as such, she was treated exactly like that, as property. Okay? So she had no right in this marriage contract. There was a contract maybe between the man and the father, and they arranged things, and they said, okay, we pay this, or the man pays this for this wife, or there was an exchange of goods, because the woman was handled like property. So, but then again, within that marriage, woman didn't have very many rights. Okay, she was kept really like property. Matter of fact, even 100 years ago, women were the property of the man. Okay, she had any wealth. The man now, most of the time, was in charge of that wealth. I think I said it a couple of videos ago that that about 50 years ago, a little more than 50 years ago, that women could not decide on having a job outside the home when they were married. That was impossible, okay, because the man was in charge. So this is how marriage was culturally, but under the law of Moses, the man and the woman were equal. And so the man and the woman had rights, and both had responsibilities. And when one of them would not fulfill these responsibilities and these arrangements, for instance, the man committed to supporting the wife through, financially. And so if he couldn't support the wife financially, then she had a reason to divorce him. Now that doesn't happen very often. The woman usually in the culture did not go through with divorce, simply because the Jewish culture was affected very much by the cultures around them. And so outside the law of Moses, women were still treated like property. Under the law, it was completely different. But parallel to the law of Moses, there were other arrangements that were made. And so even under those arrangements, women, again, were property. So that all was not biblical at all. It was biblical that the man and the woman were equal in the marriage and had equal rights when they were married, and they had equal rights to dissolve the contract if the other partner did not fulfill the arrangements. It was just very, very simple. And so that's what marriage was. Marriage was a contract. If we think about the covenant. This is another word for contract. It's covenant. We look at the covenant that God made with Israel. It was like a marriage contract. Okay, um, Israel was the wife of God in a sense, and He made a contract with Israel, and this contract was: you worship only me, you follow my commandments, you will not um, follow other gods, and I will provide for you. That was the marriage contract. And God was very patient with the Israelites, but there came a time when the Israelites kept straying away more and more. In other words, they were living in adultery. They were not. They were not faithful. And at that point, God said no. And you can find that in Jeremiah, I believe, where God told Jeremiah that, I'm done. I'm done with Israel. I am done with them. And I'm giving them a divorce paper, in a sense. I'm divorcing them. So, yeah, that did really happen. So when God can do that, then we humans can do the same thing. Not because we're better or whatever, but because that's God's law. God's law states there's a contract, and when that contract is not fulfilled, um, it's null and void. And it's the same thing with marriage. So, marriage, bottom line, is a covenant or a contract. Now, next time I may start talking about the marriage vows, because that's very important when you have a contract, that you clearly state what kinds of responsibilities, what kinds of jobs each spouse has in that covenant. And so many, actually all of them, I don't know, very few couples sit down and actually make up a contract and say, okay, this is what your responsibility, this is what your responsibility is. So many couples have this fairy tale understanding. Oh, it's going to work out. Marriage is forever, and because it is forever, nobody can break it. And so whatever I do, it doesn't matter. It's either gonna, it's gonna be forever. That's because that's what we say when we're saying, okay, love and to hold and all this other stuff that we're saying until death does us depart. So some people actually believe that, and they're very disappointed when all of a sudden their marriage is not working out, and one spouse says, well, I want out. This is not what I have imagined. So that's pretty sad. I think nowadays the state of our marriage is pretty sad because it's built on fairy tales. It's not built on reality. So it's very important. I mean, I will really spend a lot of time on this topic because it's a very important topic. Okay, we need to stop with this fairy tale mentality. We need to stop with this sacrament mentality. Marriage is a contract, and yes, it should last forever. However, in our fallen world, it doesn't. Okay? Everybody shouldn't sin. We know that, right? We all should live holy lives. We all should have a good relationship with the Lord. We shouldn't be sinning, right? Should. No, should is not what's going to make things work. We can't say, well, it should be this way, it should be that way. Now, what is reality? Reality is that we are fallen human beings, and at any time, our partners can do things that are not right, that are sinful. And then what are we going to do? Are we going to allow their sinful behavior affect us and our children? That is the question. It's not the question whether God wants us to stay together. Of course He wants us to stay together forever until we die. Of course He wants that. But He doesn't want us to sin either. So sometimes it is just necessary that we separate from a partner that is living in sin. And again, Moses made that provision. It's just in our uh, Catholic tradition. I want to use the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church started that. In our Catholic tradition, that was something that um, was not allowed. And God was used, the Bible was used to enforce this wrong belief. So I will make that very, very clear that it's a wrong belief and it was enforced falsely to keep people together or keep a person in a relationship that is abusive. And there's many kinds of abuse, and I will be talking about that as well. So next time maybe I will talk a little bit about, again, about marriage vows and how marriage was done in the Old Testament. So for today, I will finish up. This was a long video, and but I will talk more next time about marriage. And yeah, start reading some of these things. Read again about Genesis. There's also some things in Matthew about marriage and divorce. And so that's not something totally new. I've addressed some of this stuff. But next week or next time more, I'll see you then.